Picture this. You're driving through small-town America at 1 a.m., half awake, radio crackling with static, and suddenly there's this warm glow cutting through the darkness. A donut shop. Brand new. It wasn't there yesterday. The neon sign buzzes. Fresh donuts in letters that seem to pulse with their own heartbeat. Would you stop? Because in Rivercrest, population 3,847, 12 people did stop, and now they're gone. This isn't some urban legend your cousin's friend heard at summer camp. This actually happened 6 months ago, and the strangest part? The shop is still there. Let me back up a bit. Rivercrest is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the biggest excitement is usually the annual corn festival, and where nothing, and I mean nothing, stays open past 9 p.m., except the gas station on Route 47. So, when Martha Hendricks was driving home from her night shift at the hospital and saw this donut shop blazing with light at midnight, she nearly drove into a ditch. Martha's been a nurse for 30 years. She's seen everything: heart attacks, overdoses, people who swear they've been abducted by aliens. More on that later. But she's never seen a business materialize overnight in downtown Rivercrest, especially not where Old Joe's Hardware used to be before it closed down 3 years ago. The building looked different, cleaner, like someone had taken a magic eraser to 40 years of small-town grime and neglect. The windows gleamed. The door was painted this deep crimson red that seemed to shimmer under the streetlights. And the smell? Oh, God, that smell was something else entirely. Have you ever smelled fresh donuts at midnight? Not the day-old stuff from convenience stores, but actual fresh-baked donuts, still warm, sugar crystals catching the light like tiny diamonds? It hits you in the chest first, then crawls up into your brain and starts messing with your decision-making abilities. Martha parked her car. She didn't mean to. She was supposed to drive straight home, kiss her sleeping husband on the forehead, and collapse into bed. Instead, she found herself walking toward that red door like she was in some kind of trance. The bell above the door chimed when she entered. Not a normal bell, mind you, but something that resonated in frequencies that made her teeth chatter. Behind the counter stood this person. I say person because Martha was never quite sure what else to call them. Tall, pale, with dark hair that seemed to move even when there wasn't a breeze. Their smile was, well, let's call it enthusiastic. "Welcome to Nocturne Donuts," they said in a voice smooth as honey, but with something sharp underneath. "What can I tempt you with tonight?" The display case was filled with donuts unlike anything Martha had ever seen. Sure, there were glazed ones and chocolate ones, but there were also flavors that shouldn't exist. Midnight velvet, Starlight's surprise, something called forgotten dreams that seemed to shift color when you weren't looking directly at it. "What's in them?" Martha asked, because she's practical like that. The person behind the counter tilted their head. "Oh, the usual. Flour, sugar, eggs, and a few family secrets." Martha bought 6 donuts. She planned to share them with her husband and maybe take some to work that next day. She ate one in the car, midnight velvet, which tasted like chocolate and something else, something that reminded her of being 7 years old and believing in magic. By the time she got home, she'd eaten all 6. Word spreads fast in a town like Rivercrest. By the end of the week, half the town had heard about the mysterious donut shop that only opened at midnight. Some people laughed it off. Others, the night owls and insomniacs, decided to check it out for themselves. Tommy Reardon was next. The kid worked the late-night shift at the 24-hour diner out by the interstate, got off work at midnight, always drove home through downtown on his way home. He saw the lights, smelled that impossible smell, and found himself pulling over. Same setup, same pale person behind the counter with that unsettling smile. Same impossible donuts that seemed to whisper promises of satisfaction you didn't know you were craving. Tommy bought a dozen, ate them all before he had made it home. Then came Susan Walsh, the librarian who suffered from chronic insomnia. She'd been driving around town at 2 a.m. again when she spotted the glow. She bought 8 donuts and ate them all in the parking lot, then went back inside and bought 8 more. By the 3rd week, there was a pattern. People would discover the shop, buy donuts, eat them immediately, all of them, and then things got weird. Martha started sleepwalking. Not unusual by itself, except she'd never sleepwalked before in her life. Her husband found her standing in the backyard at 3 a.m., staring at the sky, muttering something under her breath. When he woke her up, she couldn't remember what she'd been saying, but her mouth tasted like chocolate and regret. Tommy began speaking in what sounded like Latin during his shifts at the diner, except it wasn't Latin, and it wasn't any language anyone could identify. The words came out smooth and natural, like he'd been speaking them his whole life. When customers asked him what he was saying, he'd looked confused and claimed he hadn't said anything at all. Susan stopped sleeping entirely. She'd spend all night at the library reorganizing books according to some system that made sense only to her. She'd arrange them by the color of their auras, she said. Books have auras, she explained to anyone who'd listen. How had she never noticed before? This is where our real story begins, with Danny Kowalski, professional insomniac and amateur detective. Well, not really a detective, but he was the closest thing Rivercrest had to someone who paid attention to weird stuff. Danny had been dealing with insomnia for 15 years, ever since his tour in Afghanistan. He'd tried everything: meditation, sleeping pills, counting sheep, counting backwards from 1,000, even hypnosis. Nothing worked. So he'd made peace with being awake when the rest of the world was asleep. He knew every late-night radio show, every 24-hour restaurant within 50 miles, and every weird thing that happened in Rivercrest after dark. And lately, there had been a lot of weird things. He noticed Martha's sleepwalking because he was up reading on his front porch when she wandered by at 3:17 a.m., still in her nurse scrubs, moving like she was underwater. He'd heard Tommy's strange muttering at the diner, had even recorded some of it on his phone. He'd watched Susan rearranging the library books through the windows during his nightly walks. Danny was good at connecting dots that other people missed. Comes with spending half your life observing the world while everyone else is unconscious. So, when he heard about this midnight donut shop, he didn't think, how convenient. He thought, how suspicious. The shop appeared 3 days after the first incident with Martha. Tommy's weird behavior started exactly 1 week after his first visit. Susan's insomnia got worse precisely 10 days after she'd discovered those impossible donuts. Correlation isn't causation. Danny knew that, but it's a hell of a coincidence. So he decided to investigate, not by visiting the shop. Danny wasn't stupid, but by watching it. He positioned himself across the street in the old bus stop shelter, armed with coffee, binoculars, and a notebook he'd brought specifically for documenting weird shit. What he saw made him question his own sanity. Between midnight and 3 a.m., the donut shop did steady business. Not busy, but consistent. People would arrive alone, park their cars, walk to that red door like they were being pulled by invisible strings. They'd stay inside for maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then come out carrying white bakery boxes. But here's what really messed with Danny's head. Every single customer ate their donuts before leaving the parking lot. Every single one. He watched a grown man tear through 24 donuts in under 5 minutes, cramming them into his mouth like he was starving. He watched a woman lick chocolate glaze off her fingers with an expression that was almost religious. And the person behind the counter, because Danny could see them through the windows, never seemed to move normally. They glided instead of walking. Their head turned too far when they looked around. Sometimes they'd stand perfectly still for minutes at a time, like a mannequin, and then suddenly spring back to life when a customer entered. On his third night of surveillance, Danny noticed something else. The customers weren't leaving immediately after eating their donuts. They'd sit in their cars for a while, sometimes up to an hour, staring at the shop, waiting for something, and at exactly 3 a.m., when the lights went out and the neon sign flickered off, they'd all start their engines at the same time and drive away, like they were programmed. By his fifth night of watching, Danny had filled 30 pages of notes, customer behaviors, timing patterns, weather conditions, and moon phases, everything he could think of that might be relevant. He was starting to see connections that made his skin crawl. The shop only appeared on nights when the moon was waning. The customers all developed sleep disorders within a week of their first visit. And most disturbing of all, 3 people who'd been regular customers had stopped showing up entirely. Danny made some phone calls, casual inquiries, nothing too obvious. Martha's husband said she'd been acting strange lately, talking in her sleep, getting up at odd hours. But when Danny asked to speak to Martha directly, her husband paused. "She's not available right now," he said. Tommy's manager at the diner said the same thing. Tommy had called in sick 3 days ago and hadn't been answering his phone since. Susan's assistant librarian told Danny that Susan had been coming to work, but she wasn't really there. She'd stand in the middle of the library for hours, perfectly motionless, then suddenly start reshelving books with mechanical precision. 3 people, all missing or fundamentally changed, all customers of Nocturne Donuts. Danny decided it was time to take a closer look. Danny's first step was research. He spent his days, while everyone else was awake and normal, digging through county records, property deeds, business licenses. According to every official document he could find, there was no business registered at the address where Nocturne Donuts operated. The building was still listed as vacant commercial property, formerly Joe's Hardware. No business license, no health permits, no record of anyone purchasing or leasing the property. The building existed, but officially, nothing was happening inside it. Danny drove by during daylight hours. The building looked exactly like it had for the past 3 years. Empty, dusty windows, faded for lease sign hanging crooked in the door. No evidence that anyone had been inside recently, let alone that someone was running a donut shop out of it. But at midnight, warm lights, fresh paint, impossible smells, and donuts that defied every law of economics and physics. This was when Danny started questioning his own sanity. Was he having some kind of a breakdown? Were the sleep deprivation and stress finally catching up to him? He'd heard of shared hallucinations, but this seemed too specific, too consistent. So he brought backup. His friend Rico, who'd worked security at the hospital and was used to weird night shift phenomena. Danny dragged him out to the bus stop shelter at 11:45 p.m. on a Thursday night. "This better not be another one of your Bigfoot things," Rico grumbled, settling in with his own thermos of coffee. At exactly midnight, the lights came on. The neon sign buzzed to life. The red door gleamed like fresh blood under the streetlights. Rico dropped his coffee. "What the hell?" "You see it too?" Danny asked, probably sounding more relieved than he should have. "I see it. Doesn't mean I believe it." They watched the first customer arrive. A woman Danny didn't recognize, maybe from the next town over. She parked, walked to the door, disappeared inside. 15 minutes later, she came out with a white box, ate the contents in her car, and then sat there, staring at the building for another hour. At 3 a.m., the lights went out. The woman started her car and drove away. Rico was quiet for a long time, and then, "What kind of donuts do you think they serve in hell?" That's when Danny knew he had to go inside. Danny's plan was simple. Observe, don't participate. Go in, look around, ask a few casual questions, leave without buying anything. He was pretty sure the donuts themselves were the problem, so if he didn't eat any donuts, he'd be fine. Famous last words, right? He waited until 1:30 a.m. the following Tuesday, when the shop had been open for 90 minutes and established its rhythm. He walked across the street, pushed open that red door, and immediately understood why people couldn't resist eating the donuts immediately. The smell wasn't overwhelming, it was perfect. It bypassed your conscious mind and went straight to some primal part of your brain that controlled hunger and desire and satisfaction. It smelled like every good thing you'd ever eaten, every comfort food that had ever made you feel safe and loved. The person behind the counter looked up as he entered. Up close, they were even more unsettling. Their skin was too pale, almost translucent. Their eyes were dark, but not brown or black. They were the color of space, of nothing, or perhaps the gap between stars. "Welcome to Nocturne Donuts," they said in that honey and razors voice. "What can I tempt you with tonight?" Danny forced himself to focus. I'm new in town, just looking around." The person smiled, and Danny noticed their teeth seemed too sharp somehow. "Of course. Please take your time." Danny walked along the display case, trying to look casual while taking mental notes. The donuts were beautiful, works of art, really. Glazes that seemed to move in the light. Toppings that sparkled like gemstones. Flavors that challenged everything he thought he knew about food. "What's your most popular flavor?" he asked. "That depends," the person said. "What do you hunger for?" "I'm not really hungry, thanks anyway." The person's head tilted, and Danny heard something crack. "Everyone who comes here is hungry. The question is what they're hungry for." Danny started backing toward the door. "You know what? I think I'll come back another time when I'm more..." "Try the midnight velvet," the person said, and suddenly there was a donut in Danny's hand. He didn't remember reaching for it, didn't remember the person moving from behind the counter, but there it was. Warm, perfect, calling to him. "On the house," the person said, "for a new customer." Danny looked down at the donut. It was beautiful. It was covered in what looked like dark chocolate, but seemed to shift and move like liquid night. He could smell vanilla and cinnamon and something else, something that reminded him of childhood summers and Christmas mornings and every moment of pure happiness he'd ever experienced. His stomach growled. When was the last time he'd eaten, really eaten, not the protein bars and the instant coffee that kept him functional during his insomniac nights? "What's in it?" he asked. The person smiled wildly. "Everything you need." Danny raised the donut toward his mouth. The smell intensified. His hand was shaking. God, he was so hungry, hungrier than he'd ever been in his life. The donut was calling to him, promising him satisfaction beyond anything he'd ever known. He took a bite, and everything changed. The donut didn't taste like chocolate. It didn't taste like vanilla or cinnamon or any earthly flavor. It tasted like completion. Like every empty space inside Danny had suddenly been filled up with warm light. Like he'd been walking around incomplete his whole life. And finally, he was whole. The person behind the counter watched him eat, their dark eyes reflecting something that might have been satisfaction or might have been hunger. "Good?" they asked. Danny nodded, unable to speak. He was dimly aware that he should be concerned, should be investigating. He should be doing anything other than standing here, eating this impossibly delicious donut. But the taste was so perfect, so absolutely right, that nothing else seemed to matter. He finished the donut and immediately wanted another. "More?" the person asked. "What are you?" Danny managed to ask through the haze of satisfaction and growing hunger. The person smiled. "We are what feeds on hunger, and your kind. Your kind is so beautifully hungry." "We?" The person gestured around the shop, and Danny realized what he should have noticed immediately. The shop was bigger on the inside than it could possibly be, given the building's exterior dimensions. The ceiling stretched up into darkness that seemed to go on forever. And in that darkness, Danny could see shapes moving, shadows that watched with eyes like black holes. "We have been hungry for so long," the person said, "feeding on scraps, on the occasional lost traveler, on animals and insects, whatever small satisfactions we could find. But then we discovered something wonderful." Danny tried to step backward, but his feet wouldn't move. "What?" "Human hunger is infinite. You hunger for food, for love, for success, for meaning, for connection, for things you don't even have names for. And when we feed you, when we give you a taste of true satisfaction, you become so much hungrier. You become perfect food. The shapes in the darkness were descending now, flowing down from the impossible ceiling like liquid shadow. They surrounded Danny, but he found he didn't care. All he wanted was another donut. The others, he said weakly, Martha, Tommy, Susan, what happened to them? They fed us so well, the person said fondly. Such beautiful hunger. And when they were empty, when they had given us everything, they joined us. They're here, in the dark, waiting to help us find the next hungry soul. Danny could see them now, the missing people. They moved among the shadows, their eyes black holes, their smiles seemed fake. They looked satisfied in a way that hurt to witness. Why donuts? Danny asked, though he wasn't sure why it mattered. The person laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. Donuts are perfect, circular like hunger, empty in the center like souls that need filling, sweet enough to tempt but never quite satisfying enough to truly fulfill. They are the ideal metaphor for what we offer. Danny felt his strength leaving him. The satisfaction from the donut was fading, replaced by a hunger more intense than anything he'd ever experienced. He needed another donut. He needed 12 donuts. He needed to eat until there was nothing left of himself but hunger and the promise of satisfaction. Please, he whispered. The person placed another donut in his hand. Starlight surprise this time, covered in what looked like edible glitter, but sparkled with the light of distant suns. Danny ate it ravenously, then another and another. With each bite, he felt himself becoming less Danny and more, hunger. Pure, essential hunger that could never truly be satisfied, only temporarily soothed before growing stronger than before. He ate until he couldn't remember his own name. He ate until the only thing left was the desire for more. He ate until he understood that he had always been hungry, had always been empty, and this place was where he belonged. At 3 a.m., the lights went out. Danny stepped behind the counter, his eyes now dark as space. His smile was over-exaggerated. He understood his purpose now. Tomorrow night, when some other curious soul wandered into Nocturne Donuts, he would be here to serve them, to ask them what they hungered for, to give them exactly what they needed, and the cycle would continue. 3 weeks later, Rico filled a missing person report for Danny Kowalski. The police found his car parked outside the old hardware building, keys still in the ignition. His notebook filled with paranoid ramblings about midnight donut shops and creatures that fed on hunger. The building was empty. They said it had been empty for years. But Rico knew better. He'd seen the lights, smelled the impossible smells. He knew his friend had discovered something terrible and been consumed by it. So now Rico watches from the bus stop shelter, armed with coffee and determination, and a growing certainty that someone needs to document what's happening in Rivercrest. Someone needs to warn people about the donut shop that only opens at midnight. He's been watching for 3 weeks now. He's filled 2 notebooks with observations. He's seen 12 people enter that red door and never quite come back out the same. And lately, he's been getting hungry, really hungry, especially for donuts. The question is, how long can you stare into the abyss before it starts staring back? How long can you investigate monsters before you realize you've become the thing being investigated? Rico doesn't know yet, but he's about to find out, because tonight, at exactly midnight, when those impossible lights come on and that perfect smell drifts across the street, Rico is going to do what Danny couldn't. He's going to walk through that red door and ask the person behind the counter one simple question. What do you really want? And maybe, if he's very lucky or very unlucky, he'll finally get an answer. But probably not the one he's hoping for. After all, in a place like Nocturne Donuts, the house always wins, and the house is very hungry. Whoa, kinda makes you feel hungry for donuts. Or maybe not. Either way, I'm so glad you heard this delicious tale. I've always loved donuts, but maybe I'll have to start reconsidering my desire for them. Until the next story, have a frightfully fun day, and I hope you got the secret word puzzle. If you have, make sure to tell me in the comments. I look forward to seeing who finds the phrase first. Until next time, thank you so much.